It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just reach out to me by email at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. So really excited about our guest today. He's known as the Alaskan Avenger. Okay, with a name like that, how can you go wrong? Right? But his real name is Jason Vukovich. He's got a YouTube channel called Alaskan Avenger. He's got a Patreon called Jason Vukovich Patreon. And he's even got a Cash App. You can find his Cash App over there on his YouTube channel if you go to the more information there. If you want to send him a couple of bucks, keep him nice and healthy over there in Alaska. You got to have some meat on your bones up there to stay warm. But Jason's got a fascinating story, man. He had a rough childhood, and then he did some time. He just got out. He just got out like weeks ago. We were just talking off the air. He had some battery charges on these registered sex offenders. Okay, so that's why they call him the Alaskan Avenger. Mr. Jason Vukovich, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon.
Hey, man, thanks for being so patient with me with all the technical problems we had today.
Hey, you know what? Not a problem.
Before we get into the whole story of the Alaskan Avenger, who is, let's say I run into you at a kid's soccer game or something like that. Who is Jason Vukovich?
Well, you know, I'm just going to be that regular old guy that looks like he has way too many tattoos and has probably just got out of prison. But one thing for sure I will tell you is that I always have a heart for kids, and I've learned all of my life lessons the hard way.
Yeah, but you sound like you're doing great, man. We've been talking off the air for quite a bit, so it sounds like you're really adjusting well. So you've only been out of prison for how long now?
It's been about a total of 6 weeks now.
Wow. And what do you notice the most different from when you went in to you got out?
Well, you know, I will tell you this, that I was gone for nearly a decade. And number one, the entire lexicon of the world has changed. So I've had to adjust very quickly so I don't offend anyone or hurt people's feelings. And then number two, the technology, bro. The technology is just so much more advanced. And I feel like I just got off a horse and buggy and stepped into the future. So that's been a lot of adjustment for me.
Well, let me ask you this, Jason. What caused you to wind up in prison?
Well, you know, I actually my conviction, I was convicted of assaulting 3 registered sex offenders. And I was a child that came from a background of child abuse, severe child abuse. And I just, as an adult, that plants a seed in your mind and it sort of sprouted. And later on in my adult life, you know, I was caught up in addiction and all type of other things, which is pretty standard for survivors of child abuse. And it just blossomed into wanting to reach out and take action and sort of be there for a kid like nobody was there for me when I was young.
Well, so then why don't you give us an idea? What happened to you? What kind of trauma did you experience as a child? And from who?
Well, I was adopted. I was actually born into a missionary family, and the dad, the father, disappeared when I was about 3 years old, so I have no memory of him. And then a year or two later, another guy from the church adopted us, married my mother, and he turned out to just be a sadistic child molester and abuser. And so to sum it up concisely, my brother and I were systematically beaten with 2x4s and other implements for about 10 years of our childhood. And in combination with that, he would come into the room and molest us, both of us, for many, many years. So that was sort of the origin story of my adult actions later on in life. And also later on, he was convicted of second-degree abuse of a minor, sexual abuse, and things like that. So eventually my brother ran away from home, and the police were called, and the guy was convicted.
I was reading a little bit about you, and my understanding is that this was done during prayer time at night, right?
Yeah, that's true. This was a church family, and actually I'm here in Alaska now, and that's where I was raised. And, you know, ironically, they were members in good standing of one of the largest non-denominational Christian churches in Alaska. Abbott Loop Christian Center. It's worth a name drop because just a horrible thing that church was in time. And that sort of that just so everybody knows, that sets a child up for failure in adult life when the people that represent that they speak for God or on behalf of God use that to sexualize and abuse you. It just sets you up for trauma and confusion later on in your adult life.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I guess there was a period of time that really must have affected your relationship with God. But what about today?
Well, the thing that's amazing is that I'm the sort of person where, rather than hating on religion as a result of my childhood, honestly, when I went to the monastery, that's what I called my prison time. I was like a very eclectic monastery. And also throughout the course of my life, I was very curious, and I wanted to educate myself. Rather than hating on religions and churches, I wanted to know how they were formed and how they were started in their inception. So I've sort of grown up, not sort of, I'm definitely a spiritualist in my adult life. I believe there's a creator and an afterlife, and certainly my life has been guided by spiritual things ever since.
And what happened to this stepfather? Did he receive any kind of justice or any kind of a prison time?
Well, that's a great question because, and this sort of ties into later on in my adult life. Ironically, I stood in the same exact courtroom that they sentenced him in when I received my sentence. And they gave me 3 times longer in prison than all of the people I assaulted combined served for their assaults against children. And then also, after they convicted my father many years ago, they gave him 3 years in prison suspended. So he was convicted of abusing and molesting his 2 sons. They gave him 0 jail time at all whatsoever. And also, they allowed him to come right back to the house after the sentencing. There was no follow-up from the state. There was no, child workers, wondering about my health or care of my brothers. He just came right back to the house.
And that's one of the things people really, really need to understand. The average sentence served by a convicted child rapist is 3.5 years of an 8-year sentence. And when it's a family member, it's even less. Everyone thinks, well, give them the death penalty. Let's give them 20 years first. let's give them a real sentence first, and then we'll work on death penalties. Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. Steps in the right direction is a big deal for me now.
Yeah.
Because I cannot and I will not support all-out vigilantism or advocate it for others. But I will tell you that there is no system or factory that is built without purpose. And we didn't arrive at these sentencing laws by accident. And I'm no conspiracy theorist, but I will tell you the justice system operates by design. It's by design. And the only way we can change the way they have designed it is for us to be careful who we vote for and to pay attention to these laws and get them changed.
Yeah, like the whole idea that we should even be discussing vigilantism. Why would that even be an option when we have a whole criminal justice system with all this money? Oh, the police budget is so huge. Why can't they take care of this problem? Why should there even be a question of needing vigilantes to step in and do anything in this?
Yeah, that's a really great observation. And, I will tell you this. I recall standing in the courtroom at my sentencing, and I'm a simple is genius sort of guy, and I don't fancy myself being too brilliant. But I will tell you this, that I penned a letter to the prosecutor and sent it to the newspaper, and they published my sentencing offer front page, by the way. And I don't advise anyone else to take this tactic because the prosecutor was very upset and didn't like the fact that he received an offer from me through the front page of the newspaper. So if you're listening and you're dealing with this, don't do that. But I told him, listen, I'll plead guilty to any combination of charges you wish. However, I have one caveat, and that is my sentence is to equal in length what each one of the child abusers served in time for their crime, and I will serve each one of their sentences back to back to back. And I told him also, I will serve the 3 years in jail that the monster that made me never served, and you can put that 3 years on top too. And interestingly, the three people, their sentences combined came to 6 years, 9 months. And then I told him, put the 3 years from my father that he never served, and that arrived at 9 years, 9 months. And I told him, run that. I'll plead guilty to whatever you want. And, of course, they laughed that offer out of the courtroom. And ultimately, I stood there, and the judge delivered me 3 times longer than all of them combined in prison for me having the audacity to go assault these people.
Right. Your ultimate sentence was 23 years, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Tell me, Jason, what's it like when you're sitting there in the courtroom and you hear 23 years?
You know, sadly, inside when he was delivering the sentence, I sort of, first of all, yes, it did settle down on my consciousness like a weight, and I knew the rest of my life was gone. But at the same time, I chuckled to myself, and I was thinking, honestly, in that moment, I was thinking to myself, this guy doesn't even get it. I received my life sentence when I was 6 years old, and I started being molested. That's when I got my life sentence. That's when my life was taken from me. You can't take something from me that's already been taken. And so I just accepted it and went on to do my time.
Have you ever had a chance to talk to your stepdad or confront him about this?
Well, interestingly, while I was waiting for sentencing in the jail, and I sat there for 2.5 years waiting for this to play out, one night a letter came under my door, and I hadn't heard from my mother in like 20 years. And she said, Larry, that was his name, Larry just passed away. He's dead. And he wrote you a letter, and I want to know if you want it. So, interestingly, he died while I was sitting in jail waiting to be sentenced for assaulting monsters just like him. And, you know, in a way, it was very cathartic. And I felt like I got up the next morning and I realized, you know, this planet is just a much better place without that person sucking air on it.
Do you want to share with what the letter said?
Well, she didn't include his letter in hers. She asked me if I wanted her to mail it to me. And I actually wrote back to her, and that's the one and only time before or since. And I told her, you know what? Number one, I don't want to hear anything that dirtbag had to say. And number two, what I do want to know is how could you have stayed with that man until the day of his death after what he was convicted of doing to his sons? Which is another really important point here that people look over or gloss over a lot, is that it's not just guys that are molesting kids. There are women who stay with guys that molest their kids for a long, long time. And that's exactly what happened in my world. She literally stayed with this man after my brother and I ran away from home, after he was convicted, during the molestation, and she was aware of the beatings, not the sexual part. She stayed with him until the day of his death.
Yeah, you know, I cover these stories a lot, and so many times, you know, you say, well, how could the wife not know? How could she not know, or other family members? And sometimes it's very obvious that they do know, but even the cops don't even bring them into it. I've seen horrific cases of child abuse where the grandmother was standing right there watching the boyfriend do it and the mother do it and just walked away, no charges on her at all.
Yeah, and I really feel like, you know, and I never push this issue or this narrative, but I really feel like she should have been charged criminally for being complicit in the abuse. Because certainly the beatings, I mean, he had a hand-fashioned 2x4 with a two-handed grip and electrical duct tape around it with holes drilled in it, and it said this side up on one side, and it said the rod of correction on the other side. And she was aware of the beatings. And then I'll never forget the day that I told her about the sexual abuse, and she forced me to sit on a stool, and she called him into the room, and she said, now you tell him what you told me. And just all of it, bro, all of it is just horrific to do to a young child. And that's sort of what drives me today with my social media platforms and things is, you know, preventing this sort of abuse or this sort of experience for other kids is literally just, it's fundamental, it's paramount.
You know, it's funny. You mentioned that paddle with the holes drilled in it. We actually, I'm 63 years old, and there was one of those when I was in Catholic school, okay? And then even when I was in high school, one of the teachers had one of those too. Yeah, well, whole different world back in those days. Okay.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, you know, a wooden spoon, a twig, a paddle, that's one thing. But when you've got a 2.5 foot long 2x4,
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't even seen a human being beat farm animals like that, much less children.
So you and your brother decide one day, hey, we're getting the hell out of here. How old were you?
Yeah, well, and actually the way it went down is he was 15 and I was 12, and he got a girlfriend, and he recounted to her what had been happening, and she was like, oh, my God, you have to get out of that house. And so he stole my mom's car, excuse me, and he escaped. And in Alaska, obviously, it's snowy in the wintertime, and he got the car stuck in a snowbank, and my mom reported her car stolen. So the police found them, and when they found them, my brother let it all out and told them what had gone on. And so it sort of compounded the injury for me, because one day my brother was there, and at least we could carry the burden together. Next thing you know, he was in a group home, and I never saw him again. And then I was 12 years old and stuck home alone with the same monster. And then eventually, weirdly, when I turned 15, the same thing happened to me. I met a girl. I sort of let out what had been happening, and same thing. She's like, you got to get out of there. And I climbed out the window, and I've never seen them again.
And so then you're like 17 years old. I guess you're living on the street, right?
Yeah, well, actually, I was 15.
15.
And I definitely was living on the street. And the other thing, too, was these were still church-going people, and I'll never forget the day after I climbed out the window, I called and told my mother that I wanted to come and pick up some clothing and stuff. And when I got to the house, all of my stuff was in trash bags on the front porch, and the doors were locked and the windows were locked. And one of the things they did was they kept my picture ID and my birth certificate. I remember her telling me, we're not going to help you on your flight with the devil, was how she referred to it. And so now I'm a young man, and I got a job, a telemarketing job, ironically. And I recall 2 weeks later, the guy that owned the place holding my paycheck and telling me, like, listen, I have your check, but I cannot give it to you until you give me ID and a Social Security card.
Right.
And at that age, number one, I was terrified of interacting with authority because I thought they would return me back to my house. And I just wasn't educated on getting a birth certificate or anything like that. So that was the day that I started into a life of being a thief and a liar, because I was driving back from that on my motorcycle, and I was broke and hungry, and I had been I would go into restaurants, bro, in the bathroom, and I would unspool the toilet paper, stuff it in my helmet, and bring it home so we had toilet paper. That's how poor we were. And I recall passing a health club, and I was thinking to myself, where do people leave money and go somewhere else? And a light bulb came on, and I was like, oh, the health club. And that was the day that I started breaking into lockers at health clubs to support us. And that was just a sad trajectory that cost me many, many years of hard lessons.
Yeah, I'm sure there must have been some arrests back in that time, too, then, right, during that period?
Oh, man, I was arrested in Washington, Montana, Oregon, Idaho, because when you're being a thief, you travel, you know, because you don't want to stay in the place where you're stealing people's wallets. And the weird part is I always had a good work ethic. I started packing moves when I was a young man, but I didn't figure out the ID thing until I was probably 17. So there was, and by then I had already had ingrained habits of being a thief. And so, man, that lasted probably 15 years of my life, and it took me a long, long, long time to figure that out.
So then what brought you to this period of time where you came up with this idea of assaulting these sex offenders?
Well, you know, I'm without saying too much, it's something that was in my heart my whole life. And a number of states, a number of places, a number of times, I would find myself in a position to do something to help out somebody else. And it was just in my mind that when I was a young man, if some tattooed up big guy would have kicked the door in and beat the brakes off of the person that was molesting me, I would have given a cheer, and I would have believed in something greater than myself. And that never happened for me. Nobody asked, nobody cared. And so I felt like I was fortunate at times to be that for somebody else. And after many years of traveling all over the country and living like a vagabond or a nomad, I decided to come back to my home state of Alaska, and I figured, I was like, you know what? They're gone. Things could be good here. And when I came back, instantaneously, I realized and encountered that this state was ravaged with drug use.
Oh yeah,
the child molestation was intense. Alaska, incidentally, has the single highest rate of rape, sexual abuse, etc., of any state in the United States per capita, for the highest percentage. And so I had just found myself in a place in life where, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to take action. And that's when the seed blossomed.
So then it was definitely premeditated. So you said one day, let me just look up these names and just, how'd you build up the courage to go over there and do it?
Well, number one, at that time, I was a drug addict.
Okay.
So oftentimes I was high. Number two, I was snorting lines of methamphetamine, just to clarify for people, which is a poison, and it's horrible. And I've been sober for 5 years now, so I'll congratulate myself on that. But it was like I had people, I interacted with people in the community, and I had people saying, "Hey, bro, they're pimping out these 15-year-old girls here," or "My uncle is molesting my niece," or whatever. And so really the first person, I'm the sort of guy that I don't want to get caught up in something that's a false accusation. So I went to the library and I pulled up the registry and I was like, wow, this guy has prior convictions. This is a real accusation. And I just went there. And then once I did that, it just sort of progressed from there. And, it's just been a really hard lesson to learn, bro. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, I can imagine. Okay, but you sound like you're really well-grounded, considering all this. You've only been out a couple of weeks. Dude, I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed.
Yeah.
How you handling all this?
Yeah, the thing is that it turns out that pain is a great teacher. Mm-hmm. And I certainly don't mean in a masochistic sense, but I will tell you, if you respond to pain and isolation and everything else properly, it can greatly advance you. And that's certainly what happened in my case. And I don't give myself too much credit for that. I think I'm just fortunate now to be surrounded by people that love me and care about me and support me. And I'm just really grateful. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't change anything. Certainly I would never conduct myself in that manner again. However, all of my actions and choices led me to be the person I am today. And I'm really grateful for that.
Now, when these attacks were going on, was the police aware of it? Like the news media aware of it? Hey, someone's out there attacking sex offenders.
Yeah, I think by the time there was like there was a number of reports. I will just say that they charged me for 3, but there was a number of reports. I certainly think that they were aware of it, and they knew. And also, when they arrested me, I had a notebook with a list. Some of which I had already visited, some that were on the list to go visit. So once they arrested me, they certainly knew, like, okay, this is systematic, and he's been doing this for a minute. And
that made the press right away?
Yeah, well, and that's another really interesting observation. Excuse me one second.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, you're fine.
That's another interesting observation is that me personally, I never reached out to the press or said anything. And one evening, when I went to one of these places, the guy's like, "Who are you and why are you here?" And I told him, "Well, you can consider me an avenging angel for the children you've molested." And so after the assault, he called the press and had them come to the hospital and gave an interview. And by then I had already been arrested, and I had no idea that the world or the media or anybody would ever even know about the case. And I remember a newspaper coming in and somebody brought it to me and it said, "Alaska's avenging angel assaults pedophiles," or whatever. And I was absolutely shocked. I was like, man, I cannot believe this guy called the police. And it was his report that set the whole avenging angel or Alaska Avenger name and everything else in motion. I never said anything to anybody.
Well, I hope you got a copyright on it now. Okay.
Yeah. I don't, but I don't, but I think everybody knows who I am.
Well, maybe I'll do it right now while we're talking. Get a little piece of this action here. Yeah. Now, wait a second.
Yeah,
so now,
get in there.
what brought you to the attention of the police department?
Well, so one of these evenings, I was knocking on this guy's door, on the front door, on his windows. I could see his lights on. And I was telling him, answer your door, man, answer your door. I need to see you. And he wouldn't answer his door. So I realized I had a tool bag in my car, and I went out there and I grabbed a hammer and I smashed out the side light of his house, and I climbed inside. And I didn't realize it. It was like a mini mansion on a big lake up here. The guy's rich. And a portion of his home he had turned into an Airbnb. And so a couple heard the glass break, and someone came out that wasn't him. And I just told him, get back in your room. This doesn't have anything to do with you. And he sort of backed up and shut the door. And then I went and committed the assault. And by the time I left the house, I drove to the end of the road, and obviously the person who witnessed me break in had called the police, and they saw the car racing out of this dead end street, and they pulled me over immediately, and that's how I got arrested.
And then you said shortly after that he called the press, and you became known as the Alaskan Avenger, the Avenging Angel.
Yeah.
Did this cause like an attorney to pop up and say, "Hey, I'll represent you, I'll help you out here"?
You know, what's amazing to me is this is another really great question and interesting point, is that, you know, in the aftermath of this, I got letters from all over the world, and I mean all over the world while I was in jail, thanking me for standing up for kids, et cetera, et cetera. And the state of Alaska, bro, crickets, silent. This state is so conditioned and cultured to abuse that people here stayed completely silent. And I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, wow, well, the story went worldwide. So certainly an attorney will pop up that'd be willing to represent me gratis or something. And that never happened, not at all. What I ended up finding was a local attorney, and people donated $2,000. And so I paid this guy $2,000 to represent me at the sentencing. And I'm sure you know the sort of representation you're going to get for $2,000.
Yeah.
You know, respect for him for being willing, but he certainly put $2,000 worth of effort into it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I've even seen, too, right before, the day before trial, listen, I need another $2,000, otherwise I'm not showing up tomorrow. Okay, so the horror stories out there, you know, with these sleaze bags, some of these attorneys. But now...
Well, and, you know, he tried to convince me. He said, you know, let's go to trial and let's do a jury nullification, see if we can get a jury nullification. And the state of Alaska, the way it works, they had charged me with 27 felonies, 9 felonies for each victim: first-degree assault, second-degree assault, third-degree assault, and so on, robbery, burglary, etc. And I knew how the state of Alaska worked and the way they do it. If they convicted me on 27 felonies, they would have stacked the time, and I would have ended up with hundreds of years in prison. And so I took the plea deal, and I ended up pleading to 3 felonies and got the 23 years.
Right, and you know, look, no one died in this, right?
No, absolutely not.
And what was like the most extensive injuries for these fellows? Anything life changing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that I broke into the house, he was a big guy, and he actually started swinging on me in the house. And the interesting thing is, you could have put a picture of this guy up next to the picture of my father, the guy that adopted me. I don't know why I'm calling him my father. That's weird. And they looked identical, bro, identical. And in that moment, I let him hit me a couple of times, and I reverted back to a childhood state. And I was like, you know what? I'm not losing this fight this time. Right. And I remembered that I had that hammer. It was in a backpack on the floor in between us. And I just squatted down and pulled it out, and I hit him a couple of times with it. And he received traumatic brain injury and a skull fracture and things like that. Fortunately for me, he did not pass away.
Yeah, yeah. But that had to be so triggering, man. If you say, once you realize, look at this guy, he looks just like that guy that tortured me, you know? That would just have to send you off the ledge, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and the weird part is, it is not maybe it was. It's not really a conscious thought. It just instantly lights up your subconscious, and you realize, I'm not losing this time. I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, I guess they call it a score sheet. I don't know if they call it that up in Alaska, where they have like your whole criminal record and it goes to probation department to recommend your sentence, right? So you must have had an extensive score sheet, right?
Yeah, I think I had at the time maybe 9 or 10 prior felonies. They were all for like theft and forgery and things like that from other states. Like I say, I had traveled and been a thief. But I wasn't a violent person. I didn't have a bunch of assaults or anything like that. Really? So this was really the first violent thing in my lifetime or on my record.
Yeah, 23 years sounds like a lot, for 3 assaults. But okay, what happens now? I guess you show up at prison. How are you received over there? The Alaskan Avenger showed up at prison.
Right.
It must have been well known, right?
Well, yeah, well known, and that's a really good question as well. An interesting point. So I'm living in a concrete shoebox. I don't see the internet. I don't see the outside world. I don't see any of that. So to me, I'm just myself. Well, number one, in prison, as far as inmates go, at least in our system, yeah, I had a solid beef and stuff like that, but respect is earned and kept in prison for what you did today or what you did yesterday. Nobody really cares about what you did on the street 2 years ago. So there's that factor. Yeah, everybody respected the crime and knew what it was. And then the other aspect, which I experienced firsthand for many years, is the COs that were working in the prison. These people were out on the street and they were seeing the internet and they were seeing the press. And out there, people are calling me a hero and all type of stuff. And so unbeknownst to me, these guys are coming into work and they're like, oh, here we go. There's the hero, Mr. Hero. This guy thinks he's special. And honestly, it created this scenario where I was UA'd frequently, cell searches. I was treated very, very sternly a lot by the COs, not all of them, but most of them, because there was all of that hoopla that they were seeing that I wasn't even privy to.
So how about write-ups? Did you get any infractions?
Yeah. So early on in my prison time, I had pretty much accepted the fact that my whole life was over. I was going to be an old man when I got out. So I was still getting high in prison. Right. I went to the hole a few times. I got write-ups for failing UAs, stuff like that. And I mean, to the credit of this community and survivors of childhood sexual abuse, it wasn't until they started reaching out to me through the mail and I was able to get some phone numbers and things like that. Excuse me. And it was when other people showed me love for the first time. That's when I really realized that I had some value and I should probably figure out what I was doing with my life.
I hear you, man. Now, and I saw looking up online, you tried some appeals saying that this was a extensive sentence, right?
Yeah, and that's another very important point in this story is that I had been diagnosed with PTSD, right. Complex PTSD from childhood abuse. We provided all of that evidence to the courts. We provided all that evidence after that sentencing. And number one, the judge just summarily disregarded that and said, absolutely not. You're a drug addict and a criminal, and you need to spend the rest of your life in jail. And so we filed the appeal based on an improper sentence because they disregarded the PTSD and everything else. And it was pretty instantaneous. The appeals court denied that appeal immediately as well.
But now I'm assuming you got out on your first parole hearing?
No. So I went to, it's called discretionary parole. And in the state of Alaska, after a third of your sentence, you're eligible for discretionary parole. And they will grant it to you. And at that time, I had 10 more years to serve. And they will grant it to you if you've shown, like you've programmed and you've changed your conduct, et cetera. And so I went to that hearing, bro, and I had, number one, a petition signed by 35,000 people saying let him out. I had 41 classes completed. job as a recovery coach established. I was a level 2 certified substance abuse counselor at that time, mental health first responder, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, I had 10 years left on my sentence. So it was an intense hearing, and they debated on it for a long time. And then they called me back in the room and they said, you know what? Discretionary parole is granted in 5 years. You have to serve 5 more years, half of the 10. And so in the state of Alaska, the way it works is when you get within 3 years of your release date, you are able to be released on community supervision with an ankle monitor, and they will let you out of prison so you can get an apartment and work, but you have to show exceptional rehabilitative progress. And so after that hearing, I went back and I served a year and 3 quarters. And then I applied for this ankle monitor program, and that's how I'm sitting out here today. They approved it. And so here I am in an apartment with a job, and I'm out here in the community.
Now, at the parole hearing, did any of the victims show up and say, hey, don't let him out?
No. So that's another thing. Yeah, to prep the hearing, they put out notices and give them the opportunity to comment. They actually send notifications to the sentencing judge, the prosecutor, to everyone, and allow them to give their inputs whether you should be let out or not. And interestingly, maybe to everyone's credit, not a single person responded.
Yeah, because, if you got like one guy show up and say, don't let him out, then they'll usually go with that one guy. In a normal case, with you got 35,000 signatures, they're looking at those as votes, too. The governor's looking at those as votes. So, you know they're not all from Alaska, I'm sure. But so that was
Yeah, a lot of them were from other states all over the place.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this. In the intervening years, Alaskans have turned out to support me and show me love and kindness, and I've been really grateful for that.
So now you only got 3 years to go, and then you're going to be off all kind of paper. You can do whatever you want.
Well, actually, in 3 years now, theoretically, not theoretically, in reality, I am still serving prison time. Yeah. I'm just doing it on the street. So after 3 years, then I start 5 years of parole.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so the thing is, the parole can be transferred to any state in the United States, and it's a lot less intensive than what I'm dealing with now. But what I hope, this is what I hope. I'm in the place now, like I own Alaska Hardcore Recovery. I'm a peer support specialist and recovery coach. I obviously produce content with the intent on shining a light on this issue in the most positive way that I can. And what I hope is that perhaps a governor will issue a commutation of the sentence if I really am the changed person that I say I am. And that would be wonderful, bro, because I think if they get it to where I end up serving as much time as all of the people I assaulted served for their assaults on children, I think we're getting closer to something that's fair and reasonable.
Yeah. And so now your employment is some kind of a drug addiction counselor?
Yeah. Yes, it is. And then, and the other thing too, like I do one-on-one sessions, like it's Alaska Hardcore Recovery for a reason. Like a lot of these guys, like it takes somebody like me to help them through their addiction. Regular drug treatment is not effective. But at the same time, also one of the requirements is that I also, like, they want to see me sweeping floors and, you know, doing dishes. So actually tomorrow I start a commercial construction job as well as everything else I've got going on.
With the recovery coaching, now who finances that? Do you get grants? You bill their insurance? How do you do that? Yeah, no, I do it myself. And to be candid with you, where I'm at now, a lot of the people that reach out to me, they don't have a lot of money. Right. So I work with people. You know, I may charge them, you know, the rate is $150 for a session, and I'll usually do one session a week with them. But oftentimes the reality is people stuck in addiction, they don't have that sort of money. So I work with them, you know. Sometimes I don't charge them anything at all. Sometimes it's just, hey, whatever you can send, that's cool. Let's do this. And you got an apartment?
Yes, I do.
What about
I have
driver's license?
What's that?
Driver's license?
What's that?
Driver's license.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, it was amazing. Once again, I give credit to the state of Alaska and the people in it, because it's kind of a funny story. I'd been gone a decade, and my driver's license was canceled. It wasn't expired. It was canceled, which is weird. And as soon as I gave my name to the person at the DOC, he said, "Oh, you know what? Send an email to this really weird, obscure address and just tell them you need to get your driver's license." And about a week later, I get an email back with a link, and it says, "Come down to the DMV and get your new driver's license." So I did. No additional driver's test or anything. It was really cool.
Oh, great. I'm going to keep an eye out for you on the road. Okay. No test. Are you kidding?
That's no lie. Yeah, that's no lie.
Yeah, I bet. Well, and what about your personal life? Girlfriend, wife? What do you got? Kids?
You know, I have 2 children, and that's something that's important to mention here is that, you know, a lot of people, they affixed the hero tag to me, and it's really important for me to let people know, like, going to prison for 10 years and abandoning your own children so they have to raise themselves, that's not heroic. And that's just the price, that one of the prices that they had to pay. Excuse me. And so, yes, I do. My son is now 25. My daughter is 22. They're grown-ups. They had to grow up most of their life without their dad. So I'm really grateful to be rebuilding relationships with them now. They live in other states. I have a grandson now, Mason, who is amazing and wild, and I intend to teach him everything I didn't know. And then on the personal life, it turns out, bro, a little bit of notoriety brings out the wild animals out of the brush. And so I've had to be extremely careful and live like a monk. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. Like physically, I just cannot, and I have not had anyone near me yet. But certainly after a decade in the desert, I'm ready for some water, for sure.
I hear you, man. And you know, parole is designed for failure, and in custody, out of custody release, whatever your supervision is right now with the tether and stuff like that, and all this stuff is designed, you know, for failure. So, and all those classes, man, all that stuff, it statistically, it keeps you out of jail. It keeps you out of trouble again, you know, even though, and that's why I asked about a driver's license, because people without a driver's license, you know, the risk goes way up, you know?
Yeah, that's really true. I have 2 sides to this issue. Number one, nothing but gratitude and humility and respect for the DOC for allowing me to be out here, because I sort of think of myself, and they do too, as like a radioactive circus clown with all of this notoriety and attention and the internet stuff. Alaska is 30 or 40 years behind any other state. So number one, I am the first inmate in the history of the state of Alaska to be a social media creator upon release. First one ever. So there was a massive learning curve for them as well. Like, how do you manage someone who is on social media with a worldwide reach? Like they had never encountered that before. So I give them the credits for allowing me to even do that. That's amazing. Number 2, I will tell you, there are so many rules and guidelines and things and stuff to remember to meet all of their requirements that you're absolutely right. It feels as though it's designed for failure, but I intend to succeed.
No, I have great hope for you. I really do. I'm very encouraged by this phone call, because you never know who you're going to get when you're booking a guest, you know?
Yeah.
Now, the Alaskan Avenger on YouTube, what are we going to find there if we go there and tune in?
Well, you know, when you get on there, I will tell you this. My purpose is to expose people that need help, expose their needs to the world, so we can group together and help each other. Recently, I did a story about a little kid, Waylon, and he'd been assaulted on Christmas Eve by his mother's boyfriend and received traumatic injuries. And just that video alone has absolutely blessed my soul. It got a couple of million views, and we were able to put $70,000 in the kid's GoFundMe for his physical therapy and things like that. And then, of course, an ocean of people have rallied around him for prayer and things like that. And honestly, that's my stuff right there. That literally is what gives my life purpose. And then the other thing, too, is like exposing, you know, things that need to be paid attention to, in-home caregivers, people assaulting kids at home. And aside from the topical stuff, it turns out I got a tiny little sense of humor, and people just love it when I do these little travel logs, because I find funny stuff to say on the daily, and I don't know why, but people love it.
And what about the Patreon? What kind of content do you have over there?
Yeah, so you asked about spirituality, and on my Patreon, which, mind you, Jason C. Vukovich is the name on there. I spent 10 years in prison studying metaphysics and different spiritual traditions and things like that, and I wrote 13 books while I was in there, not long ones, short ones, and it's sort of a summary and analysis of different spiritual practices and my insights and stuff like that. So every week I upload another chapter from different books, and there's some commentary in there, and I interact with people, and I just want to support people in advancing themselves spiritually, and that's what the Patreon is.
And are these books available on Amazon?
No, none of them are published, and all of the stuff that you see on Patreon is like literally, it is my handwritten books. And I created them in a manner that is not like other books. And you just have to go there and sign up to see what I mean. But I promise you this, if you're a seeker and a spiritualist, I will save you 15 years of seeking because I did it for you.
Now, what about the subject of your crimes here? Have they been in touch with you since you've been out? Any kind of reconciliation going on with them?
No, not at all. Matter of fact, one of them has passed away. I think that I probably have, for legal reasons, could not be in contact with them. Another interesting dynamic is that initially they wanted me to go to a halfway house, and there are so many registered sex offenders in Alaska at the halfway houses. Yeah. They couldn't find one to put me in where there wasn't a bunch of sex offenders there. And they didn't want me to disrupt those people's existence or make them scared. So it took quite some time to even arrive at this in my own apartment because they couldn't put me anywhere. So I think the rest of my life, it's going to be pretty secure that I will be uplifting kids and victims of that sort of thing. I will not be in contact with any offenders, sex offenders.
Then how'd you manage that? A friend on the outside arranged for this apartment for you? Because it has to be approved before you leave.
Yeah, 100%. One of the people in my life, actually, she flew up here, and it was an Airbnb, and she put the first 2 months on her credit card, which was amazing. Fronting the rent was the gift, but I do have to pay it back, and I've been able to pay 1 month back, which is great. So yeah, it was just a loved one who respected what I had done and been through that came up and made that happen for me. Very humbling.
Oh, yeah, that's such a blessing. Because so many people, they can get out. They can get out on parole, but they can't because they don't have a location to go to that's been inspected and approved by probation and parole. A lot of guys. Yeah,
so true. And that was one of the things that I ran into, and just like the obstacles you pointed out.
Yeah.
They'll tell you, okay, you're approved to go, and you're like, great, well, where am I going? I'm homeless. I've been homeless for a decade. And they're like, well, we don't know. Figure it out. And you're in prison, and you can make collect phone calls. So they certainly don't set it up so it's possible for people to make that happen. And then the downside is, a lot of times, like in my case, they were trying to force me to go to a transitional living center or something. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I've attained sobriety, I'm drug-free, and you're going to force me to go live with other felons who have not immediately? Like, that is the worst option. So I'm just very grateful again and humbled that the DOC has allowed me to even do this with some help from some friends.
Yeah, there's so many things about the system are just so frustrating and so heartbreaking. So many of these guys, too, in and out of county jail, and they're on psychiatric medication while they're in jail, but then they just dump them out the door in the worst neighborhood in town. You know what I mean? With no meds and no support, no nothing. And what do you expect but failure,
That's exactly right. And, I will also I want to touch on that a little differently briefly. I will tell you this. I did informal social surveys throughout my years in the penitentiary, and I will tell you unequivocally, probably 80% of the guys that I did time with, whether their issue was drug addiction or whether they were assaultive or whether they were thieves or whatever it was, 80% of them for sure had childhood abuse or trauma backgrounds. And it's interesting to me that it's 2025, and hopefully we can address this with these DOCs coming forward. while I was in there, I watched guys that molest children walk down to a sex offender program, take 18 months of therapy, and get out on early release. Meanwhile, I pursued and pushed PTSD therapy for childhood abuse with the DOC for the whole time, and they don't offer it. They will not offer it. And matter of fact, I offered to pay for, secure, provide my own therapy for complex PTSD from childhood abuse, and they denied it every single time. So the DOCs in our country, they're still treating secondary issues. They are not treating primary issues. And if they started doing that, you could probably reduce crime and recidivism by a good number.
So, Jason Vukovich, when you see these shows on TV and they talk about how in the prison they have these kangaroo courts and the sex offenders in there are mistreated and abused, and that, what was your experience of how the sex offenders were treated in prison?
The fact of the matter is the DOC's commission is to protect them. That's their commission. They're legally required to do so. So the inmates, as far as the inmates are concerned, we full-time PC'd these guys up. If they were on the yard, they got beat down, et cetera, et cetera. That's how that worked, and they lived in protective custody. However, in protective custody, they have movies and books and exercise bikes, and they have rec with themselves, and they live great lives, and they're protected by the entire DOC force. And anyone that dares to assault or interact with any of them negatively will pay a stiff penalty and probably lose good time and everything else. So I'm not really going to comment too much on that specifically, but I will tell you their commission is to protect them and give them, a safe and good time while they're in there.
I had a guy in law enforcement once tell me this whole idea of taking sex offenders and forcing them to live more than 1,000 feet or yards away from a school or anything, this kind of stuff like that, actually makes it harder because they wind up out in rural areas where the cops driving around can't see them and keep an eye on them. They're out hidden away. So it's actually, it's worse. These things we come up with. You know what I mean?
That's a really brilliant observation. Yeah. And I'll tell you this. I studied with the indigenous elders up here in Alaska. While I was in prison, I did over 100 warrior sweats, and I learned a lot of their culture and traditions. And they have an extremely high rate of molestation and et cetera in their community because they live isolated and they're inside together for many months of the year. And, in their culture, rather than ostracizing or banishing the person that's abusing kids, they have a system where they set up 5 guardians once someone has demonstrated that behavior, and they're volunteers in the village. And their job is to keep an eye on that person and keep them within sight or within supervision. And that's how their communities handle it. And you're absolutely correct. The way our system is set up, a lot of these guys, they come out, and I told you the halfway houses are full of them. Yep. And the reason why that is, they can't find a neighborhood to live in. And so when they get off supervision, a lot of them end up homeless, wandering around. And there they find the targets that they happen to run into. So as a society, as a country, we definitely need to just be smart about this. And that's some of, it's easy. It's low-hanging fruit to say we all hate pedophiles or child rapists and we want them to die or whatever. That's easy. That's basic. What's much more difficult and beneficial is to we need to figure out a way to make this better because they're going to continue to exist, and we need to figure that out.
I know one of the things that's really important to you is you want to discourage vigilantism.
100%, 100%. And the reason why that's so important to me is I was a child that was placed in a spiritual and emotional prison cell when I was young, as far back as I can remember. And then when you go demonstrate this vigilante behavior, you end up living in an actual prison cell. And as much as it transformed me, it was terrible, and I don't wish it on anyone else that's a survivor. And if you go out there and break the law and you commit assaults, guess what? You're now going to lose the rest of years of your life that could be beneficial and could be good. And you may have stopped somebody from molesting one kid, but guess what? You could have uplifted 100 if you would have stayed free.
Yeah, as we go on in life, there could be one point of time in our life where you think, hey, violence is a solution to this problem. And then when you look back, you just realize it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was a different person back then. It's not the solution today.
Yeah, and I will say as well that fear is probably the only deterrent that I have seen that actually works for these people. I do not believe there has been found yet a cure. I think that's pretty universally acknowledged. But I will also tell you, I've tried to advance myself and educate myself on this issue because I feel like it's my responsibility now. And, interestingly, in 2007, they did MRI brain scans of people that had this compulsion to sexualize children. And it turns out 95% of them had degraded white matter in their brain, and it actually is a brain issue. And so the thing is, the brain has been identified with the issue, which means it could be addressed. But again, our country, our leaders, people in the pharmaceutical industry, they haven't chosen to pursue it. And I really hope someday we actually get there.
Well, there's no profit. There's no profit in selling drugs that stop pedophilia, that I can think of. Jason, we've been talking. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, we're out of time. How's that, bro? We've been talking. Jason Vukovich, Vukovich, and the Patreon is Jason C. Vukovich, Vukovich, and you can check out his YouTube channel called the Alaskan Avenger. Jason, man, I really enjoyed this talk, and thank you so much for being patient with me with the technical problems there. And you never need to come back and promote something, man. You got an open invitation to come back.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. It was awesome. And everybody out there, stay blessed.
Yeah, don't forget the Alaskan Avenger on YouTube. Thank you so much. Good night.